On Wednesday, the White House revealed one very big tax plan on one very small piece of paper. Economic advisor Gary Cohn said the one-page plan would be one of the biggest tax cuts in history. But despite the hype, we learned few details.
We are working very diligently with the House and the Senate on coming up with final details of the bill. You're going into very micro details on some of these. Very important. We agree. Very important. You know, our basic premise here is to simplify the tax system, lower rates, and make it easy. We don't want to penalize people. We want to make the system very fair.
What we do know is that the 7 current income tax brackets will be cut down to just 3 at 10%, 25%, and 35%. And the president's plan would cut corporate tax rates from 35% to just 15%. Something else we don't know is how these proposed changes might affect the president personally, because he won't release his tax returns. Lanhee Chen joins me now from Palo Alto, California. He's a research fellow at the Hoover Institute and former Mitt Romney policy director. Lanhee, welcome.
Thanks, Elaine.
So is this plan realistic?
I think we'll have to see, Elaine, what the plan really is. I mean, I think what we know so far is the president's put a marker out there regarding where he wants to see rates going, what he wants to do in terms of simplification. But much of what will dictate whether the plan is successful or not will have to do with how Congress is able to implement or to actually take some of the ideas and put them into action. And oftentimes with tax reform, it's the case, the devil is in the details. So we'll really have to see.
Well, how would these proposed tax cuts, you think, affect the deficit?
I think that is another big question. Traditionally, there have been Republicans who have believed that you can cut taxes without real regard for the deficit implications because tax cuts effectively pay for themselves. And there are other Republicans who believe, look, you've got to do enough what's known as base broadening to help pay for a tax cut. I think in this situation, what we're seeing are very, very large rate reductions. We have a little bit of detail around maybe some of the deductions and credits and exemptions they want to get rid of to help pay for it. But ultimately, we're not going to know until they actually put this plan into effect, or rather until Congress takes the plan and actually tries to write the specific details about how much and whether this thing's going to be paid for.
So on a related note, there was no mention, Lanhee, of the border tax in the president's plan, which is something House Speaker Paul Ryan, as you know, has pushed for years. Can you explain, first of all, for our viewers, what that is and why some Republicans want it?
Well, part of the reason why Republicans want it is precisely because of the previous question you asked, which is how do you pay for rate reductions? The answer might be instituting a border adjustment tax. And the basic idea behind a border adjustment tax is simply that you would tax goods based on where they're actually manufactured rather than where they're actually sold. So in some situations, that would result in higher tax situations for certain companies or certain industries. For the retail industry, it might result in some significant economic difficulties, which is why many in the retail industry didn't like the idea, and why many in Congress are having difficulty with it as well, and why the Trump administration has been skeptical. So this has been an idea that's been kicking around in part to help pay for tax reform, to help pay for tax rate reductions. But it wasn't included in the proposal precisely because of how controversial it is.
Well, I know we don't have the details, but from what we do know so far, Lanhee, who would benefit the most from these tax cuts?
Well, generally speaking, tax rate reductions always will help people at the upper end of the income scale because they pay more in taxes. And as a result, if their tax rates get cut, you're going to see as a pure dollar amount, they're going to benefit significantly. I think the big question will be, though, Elaine, if in fact the president goes forward and curbs many of the exemptions and credits and deductions that wealthier taxpayers take advantage of. If that's the case, they're not going to benefit nearly as much than in the case of a pure rate reduction. So I think, again, I hate to keep saying it, it does matter with the details, and I think that will largely drive who the winners and losers of this are. So
do you think that these are hard and fast figures here, Lanhee, or do you think these are just sort of starting points for negotiation?
Yeah, I think anytime you put a tax plan out there, it is a lengthy negotiation. It is about trying to figure out what really matters to different parties involved in tax reform. So while I think it would be great for the economy if we could get to a 15% corporate rate, great if we could get to the kind of tax simplification we're talking about on the individual side, many of the details are going to be negotiated and yet remain to be seen.
And we've also learned that the Trump administration is readying an executive order to pull out of NAFTA. Why would the White House want to do that at this point?
Well, I think it's to fulfill the president's campaign promise around getting out of NAFTA, around negotiating trade deals that, in his words, work better for the U.S. The challenge with this is there are a number of Republicans who are quite favorable toward NAFTA. Think about John Cornyn, the U.S. Senator from Texas, as a perfect example of somebody whose state benefits significantly from NAFTA. So we'll have to see if that measure of support is going to be there, which may be why they're pursuing this whole line of activity initially via executive action. But it does fulfill something the president said he was going to do during the campaign. So I'm not surprised, Elaine, they're moving in this direction.
All right. Lanhee Chen, really appreciate your time and insight. Thank you.
Thank you.